Welcome back to Dark Nexus. My name is Rob. I'm the Game Master, and we got our 4 players with us.
I'm Katie.
I'm Paul.
I'm Robert.
And I'm Johnny.
We are about to launch into Act 3 of the podcast, the 3rd book of the Strange Eons Adventure Path. But I wanted to gather up first to recap the prominent events from Act 2. It was a lot of episodes, well over 50, and I think a refresher would be beneficial for everyone. And just a reminder, if you're someone who likes getting into the weeds on all the nitty-gritty details, please check out the wiki on our website, darknexuspodcast.com. Katie and I keep that as exhaustively updated as we're humanly able. And after all this time, there is a crap ton of stuff there. There are entries for over 150 NPCs, nearly the same amount of places and things, the full text for all of the dreams and documents and visions that you've heard on the show. And hey, if you're here after more than 90 episodes of this nonsense, and especially if you are interested in our massive wiki project, please consider becoming a patron and helping make this project sustainable for us. $5 or $10 a month goes a long way for a small outfit like ours. If you feel we've earned it, we could really use your support. Patreon.com, that's Patreon/plug and hum. All right, let's recap. In Act 1, 4 people woke up with no memories in the basement cells of Briarstone Asylum.
Dora, an Azimar psychic.
Grip, a half-orc brawler.
Gull, a human investigator and gunslinger.
And Ray, a human oracle.
They all had the experience of being vigorously shaken awake, but there was nobody there who could have done so. And they all had these desperate cries ringing in their brains, cries that seemed to have been instructions from themselves or versions of themselves to themselves.
Remember.
Hide yourself.
Survive this.
Destroy them.
This moment in time, the party's awakening, it's been linked to other events happening nearby, primarily the reemergence of Mother Ariadne, the Briarstone Witch, a woman who vanished, along with everyone else in Thrushmoor, around 700 years ago. Yet, perhaps, she said to make you suffer. These characters' pasts were a total mystery at first, but pieces of the puzzle have been slowly filling in, and meanings behind the marks left on their bodies have come to light.
Ray's body was covered with the scars of his sister Daria's name, carved into his flesh thousands of times. And though he was given oracular powers by Shaylin, the incorruptible one, a goddess of beauty, he was cursed with rotting flesh for reasons unknown.
Dora had the scar of an old brand on the back of her neck, a glaring eyeball, the mark of a slaver from the north named Feshka Nellit. She also had a sickly purple stain all over the backside of her body, left over from the carpet of purple-grey mossy fungus that had once coated it when Tima was cultivating her bond with Jamendor, the inmost blot.
Grip also had a brand, the crude whip mark of a slaver from the south named Biting Lash. Additionally, his arms were covered in tattoos that once had been sigils dedicated to the demon lord Nergal, but an attempt had been made to break their meaning.
Gull also bore the brand of Biting Lash and had a prominent facial tattoo of equilateral triangles in a spiral shape, likely representing some deep personal meaning in the Virizian tradition. He's since removed that mark and begun a new one.
Briarstone Asylum was being held captive by Ariadne's lieutenant, the Tatterman, and being slowly dragged into the dimension of dreams, thanks to a series of occult rituals performed at the site. For 11 days, the party struggled to survive, save as many innocents as they could, and escape these tormented borderlands between the real world and the dreaming. In the process, by means of journals, patient records, dreams, and psychometry, the characters learned what they could about themselves. They learned that they had come from the nearby town of Thrushmoor, And they had all, including Dr. Gulliver Vaticus, worked for Count Hazerton Pragmus Lowls IV, ruler of Versex County.
Grip had once been known as Gruk Riptusk, or Riptusk the Grey, known to be a vicious tyrant.
Dora's body had previously been controlled by a woman named Tima Antea, who now exists only as a dark passenger in Dora's psyche. Tima had been married to Gulliver Vaticus, and she was Ray and Daria's mother.
Gull's story was particularly difficult to parse, but it seemed he had been known as the Triangle Man or the Snake. Like Riptusk, he seemed to be responsible for Count Lowell's dirty work, including the murder of Briarstone Asylum's former administrator.
He's also been known as Roni, and now as Vic.
Ray was born as Braden Vaticus, son to Tima and Gulliver, brother to Daria. He had once been a priest of Zan-Kuthon.
They were tied together by their relationship with Lowls and Vaticus. They were also tied to a woman named Weirelai, a denizen of Leng. More on her in a bit. Eventually, the party escaped Briarstone Isle along with a group of fellow survivors and made their way to the town of Thrushmoor, and that's where Act 2 began. You arrived back home and found chaos and confusion waiting for you. After dropping you off at Briarstone Asylum, it seemed Count Lowls had split town and sailed south. In his absence, another one of his employees, Melisande Kororo, a priestess of Hastur, the King in Yellow, she stepped up and unleashed a wave of terror. Urged on by voices she'd heard from beyond the stars, behind the veil, she bent her significant will and resources to the task of activating Thrushmoor's 3 star stele in an attempt to send Thrushmoor to Carcosa or merge it with Carcosa. Either way, something awful. During the many months Count Lowls had been planning his voyage to Casimir and then on to some unknown desert, Melisande had been laying the groundwork for his departure. And when he left, a coterie of her Hastur-worshipping allies from Absalom slipped into town, along with a mob of scum from Lake and Carthen, led by their shaman, Daggerbotha. Melisande sealed up Iris Hill. The scum took over Fort Halecourse. Together, they used the teleportation powers of the Standing Stones to kidnap all the town leaders, and then more and more and more citizens, holding them for a mass sacrifice her followers called the Great Harvest. Now, most of Act 2 was spent trying to figure out exactly what the heck was going on, who was responsible, and how to stop it. Our story broke down fairly neatly into 3 sections. The first third of the act was about getting your bearings in town and taking out Melisande's supplier of drugs and poison, a fallen druid named Jane. In Jane's cave, the party became one with Jamandor. Your dreams are now his dreams. And then, on the cusp of Melisande's ritual, Ray was assassinated by an old friend or lover, one of Melisande's agents named Reese. Our backup buddies, together with Skywyn and her crew, managed to stop a platoon of scum from kidnapping and sacrificing the Briarstone survivors, and so the first attempt at the Great Harvest failed. But clearly the danger was far from over. The second third of Act 2 consisted of reclaiming Fort Halecourse for the town, slaying the monsters that were holding it in Hastur's name, and freeing the prisoners being held there. And the final third of our act came down to taking the fight to Melisande and her allies in Iris Hill, which you did. And in the end, you unearthed a fairly significant trove of information about Count Lowls' past, and if not his exact plans, at least an idea of where he's heading and what he's looking for. Neruzavin. We also, throughout Act 2, uncovered more and more information about your characters' pasts.
Tima was a wizard in her former life. She came from Numeria, a barren land north of Ustalav, populated by barbarian tribes and littered with strange ancient technological relics. She'd been held for some time by the slaver Feshka Nellit and then was sold by Weirelai to Count Lowls 25 years ago, from which point she acted as his researcher. She was accounted as brilliant in Lowls' journals, but prone to rages and was drugged into compliance for many, many years.
Myacnean Munn, Lowls' friend from university, made the drugs, and Vaticus administered them. This lasted for at least 5 years in both Rosenport and eventually Thrushmoor.
But at some point, Tima became a willing accomplice of the Lowell's operation and no longer needed to be drugged.
We know that Lowell's introduced all of them to Hastur, and they all became followers of the King in Yellow.
And we know that Myacnean Mun introduced Jamindor to Tima, and that Tima, more than the rest, seemed to have deeply embraced a relationship with the inmost blot. She even cultivated the growth of that seed inside her head until it spread out onto her body. 22 years ago, Tima gave birth to Ray, her son, with Gulliver Vaticus. 18 years ago, she married Vaticus. A few years later, she gave birth to Daria. There are reasons to suspect that Vaticus might not have been the father. And then 13 years ago, Daria was killed by Ray. A Ray who had been drugged and manipulated by Vaticus. The loss broke her. Her relationships with her husband and son seemed to fall somewhere between uninvested and hostile. But Tima apparently deeply loved her daughter and spent the next dozen years obsessed with that loss.
Speaking of obsession, at some point after that, Lowell's became fixated on Star Steely, their connection to Carcosa, and locating the site of Jamindor's body on Golarion, Thrushmoor's sister city of Neruzavin. He brought book after book after book to Iris Hill,
where Tima led the research and sank into her studies to such an extreme that almost nobody in Thrushmoor knew about her. She was a housebound recluse obsessed with uncovering the secrets contained within the books that Lowell's brought her, the secrets that only she was smart enough to unearth, because Lowell certainly wasn't smart enough on his own to find out what he was looking for.
And in the final hours of the act, Dora made a discovery that seemed to have really shaken her.
She learned from studying Tima's handwriting in the margins of Lowell's books that the letter in the violin she's been carrying since Chapter 2 had been written by Dora, not Tima, as she'd always assumed.
Riptusk was primarily a fighter in his former life. He came from the Brazen Peaks in Garund, likely somewhere near the active volcano Mount Kiba. He'd been held captive for some time by gnolls, especially the Flind slaver Biting Lash, and then was sold by Werelai to Count Lowell's 15 years ago, from which point he acted as muscle. Like Tima, we know he was drugged into compliance for many years, but he was introduced to Hastur by Lowell's, and he loved the chaos and nihilism of it all, and eventually became a willing participant in the Lowell's operation.
And we know that Tima whispered the name of Jamindor to Riptusk in order to seed him.
We know that Riptusk had once bound his soul to Nergal, the god of senseless warfare, but that at some point in his adult life he attempted to break that bond. He changed his tattoos, which certainly might have had some sort of effect, but it certainly wouldn't have saved his soul. He seemed to have been trying to hide from the eye of the shining scourge, as Melisande put it, but it's unclear how successful he had been. In recent years, Riptusk had been Thrushmoor's constable. He was known to everybody in town, feared by all, and seemed to have been extorting money from local businesses.
Victor Solotov was a rogue in his former life. He came from Varizia originally, perhaps the city of Riddleport, but he ended up with his battle brother Riptusk as a prisoner of Biting Lash by the time he was a teenager. He was sold, by Werelai, to Count Lowell's 15 years ago, from which point he also worked as muscle. Like the others, we know he was drugged for many years, but he was eventually introduced to Hastur and loved the power and control of it all, and became a willing participant in the Lowell's operation.
Tima seeded him as well.
We know Vic had an uncle, Gavroni Stoicha, who had been a Zarni crime boss. Vic claimed a version of his name and his nicknames for many years and was known as Roni, or the Snake, or the Triangle Man. But he also seemed to delight at times in refusing to let people call him any name. or to change nicknames weekly. Like Riptusk, he was a feared and hated figure in Thrushmoor, one who tormented the locals, and someone who went out of his way to keep all information about him secret.
Braden Vaticus was a cleric in his former life. He was born in Rosenport but spent most of his childhood in Thrushmoor. At age 9, he murdered his sister, Daria, encountered Werelai, and then not much is known about him after that, except that he spent a span of years in Cheliax and returned to town as a fervent follower of Zan-Kuthon and pledged himself fully to Lol's cause. There's no evidence that Lolz and Mun ever drugged him, but his own father certainly did. He had been seated at some point, presumably by Tima, but whether or not his ties to Hastra and Jamandor ever overtook his faith for the Prince of Pain, that is unknown.
From Lolz's journals, we learned that he, well, probably Tima, learned of someone who could tell him how to find Neruzavin, this lost city where Jamandor supposedly dwells. This was the man known as the Mad Poet, an impossibly powerful being from another world who dwells in the Dreamlands, a relatively stable part of the Dimension of Dreams. 3 years ago, Lolz took the whole team into the Dreamlands, and you all learned firsthand that you gotta bring gifts if you deign to waste the Mad Poet's time. He killed you all in the dreaming, and you woke up insane. And then, after a long period of recovery, you began a quest to find suitable gifts. Night after night, you all went back to the Dreamlands, and sometimes with extra mercenaries as well, to find out what you could offer to the Mad Poet. You asked and searched high and low, encountering at some point an idol and a lake, according to Ray, and presumably Lolz found what he needed. In the process, Lolz learned that gifts would buy access, but only a sacrifice would purchase the information that he sought. And in exchange for the collected memories and life experiences of Tima Antea, Gulliver Vaticus, Grook Riptusk, Victor Zolotov, and Braden Vaticus, Lolz presumably learned the information he sought. And now he's on his way, with a healthy head start. The other significant threads of the act included the process of wrestling with Ray and Daria and what they had both become after their deaths, the integration of Dabwick into the party, and a fateful encounter with Werelai, the stranger. Let's start with Ray and Daria.
After Daria's death, we know that Tima cut her daughter's hands off, stripped the bones of flesh, and then likely dumped the body. Daria became a sort of soul vampire that drained the life and vitality out of the people of Thrushmoor for over a dozen years.
As Ray died, Bates unintentionally captured his soul within a vessel of ectoplasm, preventing him from departing the plane. And even when Bates released Ray from this prison, Ray didn't depart. He remained as a ghost and began haunting the Wailing House.
It took the efforts of the entire party, as well as a version of Daria drawn from an alternate timeline, to destroy the vampire and put the ghost to some sort of rest.
And then Dabwick.
Dabwick is an halfling from Casimir, an urban druid. We're just getting to know their story, but so far we've seen that they were named Penelope as a baby and that they were surrendered by their parents to an orphanage as an infant. And not long after, an unknown figure kidnapped them out of the orphanage, yet by the time they were a toddler, Penny had been living in the city stores, loosely cared for by a dire possum called Old Mum. As a teen, they'd earned the name Dabwick by peacefully settling a great misunderstanding between the people of Casimir and a colony of waylaid bats. They later took up work as a ratter and an honorary building inspector, and even found themselves employed by the great Myacnean Mun, the most beloved philanthropist in the city.
However, they've come to understand that much of what they thought they knew about Mun was a lie, and that the great conglomerate city they learned of in Mun's home is truly the monstrous empty city of Carcosa.
They helped one of Casimir's great detectives save a group of prisoners from torture and madness at the hands of twisted Darrow cultists. And then, earlier this year, they agreed to join their friend Skywin on a river voyage north plagued by ill omen.
And finally, Weirelai. Her entanglement in this story goes back, way back. She was tied to Count Lol's mother, Nemira, long ago, both of them fervent worshippers of Hastur. We know Weirelai found Tima, Riptusk, and Roni when they were each 9 years old, took them out of their former situations, and orchestrated their eventual placement together in the Lol's home. We know she visited regularly over the years, watching as you were forced into these terrible lives of slavery, abuse, and eventual corruption to the worship of her foul elder god. She watched as you were twisted into monsters. We know that when Ray was 9 and he killed his sister, she was there. Then the next thing we know about him is that he was back at home, a priest of the torture god, back in the circle. No escape. And we know from some of her final words before you sent her back to Leng, temporarily at least, that she considered Lol's robbing you of your memories and Risi killing Ray, she considered these acts to have been depriving her of a vengeance she had been waiting over 60 years to take. In other words, a vengeance older than any of you, perhaps a vengeance that spans generations. All right, those are the highlights of where we're at. There are a ton of other details, of course, from our first 94 episodes. We can't hit them all, but here's a small handful.
We're all seeded by Jamandor again, and we're all sharing its dreams.
Dreams of giant cephalopods driven to murder their own children and then dying.
Dreams of hive mind energy beings dying.
Dreams of spider giraffe fungus puppets dying.
Dreams of soaring through space.
Worlds burning.
Rotting. Changing.
Becoming.
And we know that relations amongst this party in the final days before Lol's sacrifice were strained, to say the least.
Tima had hired Risi to kill both Ray and Vaticus.
Ray had hired Risi to kill all the others.
Riptusk and Roni's relationship had fallen apart.
To the extent that Roni made a point of writing to Riptusk that it'll hate him forever.
And when we pick up, here's where we're at.
We're on the Selin Starling with Skywin and her crew, sailing south toward the Selin River and eventually Casimir.
We've read Lowell's journals, and we've got his collection of 22 special books with us.
We have a trail to follow Lol's in the real world and in the Dreamlands.
We have discovered the occult ritual that can get us to the Dreamlands, and Dora only needs 5 days of study to figure out how to enact it.
We said goodbye to almost everyone we've met thus far when we left Thrushmoor.
Including one of the backup characters, Bates. We don't know yet who'll be replacing him in our story.
Or who will be taking that role after Dabwick's promotion.
And finally, unlike last time, none of us left Act 2 with any diseases.
Huzzah! Yay!
But there is still madness in the air. Dora continues to suffer from a delusion madness, but she's at least managed to keep it dormant since leaving the asylum. She is sitting on 7 sanity damage, though.
Grip still has his phobia, but he's dormant again at 0 sanity damage.
Vic is still dealing with the paranoia he obtained when he was Roni, but at least he's down to only 3 sanity damage left to remove.
Huzzah.
Well, that was
It'll never be
that was
gone.
a little uncalled
It'll
for.
never
I
be
think.
gone.
Are
What
you,
about Dabs?
Are you
What about-
insinuating something about my paranoia?
And Dabs is sane with no sanity damage
Oh,
remaining.
Dabs.
That's right.
So that is the end of what I prepared as a recap. Last time around, we had the alignment conversation here, but because I do know somebody is thinking of talking about changing alignments, I think I'm going to save that for when we actually level up and we'll do
You're not
that
going to make
there.
us write down on a piece of paper what we think everybody's
I don't know,
alignment
we'll
is
see.
again.
That was kind of fun, but
That's kind of fun.
everybody agreed, so I don't know.
Yeah. It was fun, but not interesting.
Wanted to check back in on. I think at this point we've reviewed them plenty of times, but just one more check in on our house rules. It sounds like we're still game to keep playing with sanity points in this system for now.
Yeah.
Sure. Let's get rid of diseases, though.
Well,
Oh,
so
yeah, seriously.
afflictions, honestly, I mean, they barely affected you this book, and you are now at the point where you actually have access, thanks to Dab. You actually have access to spells that can deal with them.
Sure.
So, unless you all feel super strongly, I'm inclined to keep them in because I think they're a little more realistic. And then, if we hit a wall,
I was
we can talk.
joking. I knew you're never going to take diseases away.
No, I would if you all said this isn't fun anymore.
Still fun.
Action points, we still like him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shame points or action points? I say
they still
I say
shame-based?
they can be either.
Sure.
I feel like I want to make a transition from shame into pure action,
I like that.
but I don't think we're there yet.
This is a good book for all of you to be thinking about transitions between versions of yourself and how you see yourself and how you see the world. It's the first time in this story that you won't be under the exact specific kind of continuous never-ending threat you have been every single day thus far. Not, of course, that there won't be threat, but we're going to start measuring time. You four know this, but our listeners might not. We're going to start measuring time a little more in possibly days and weeks.
A bit more loosey-goosey.
Yeah, we're going to be stretching things out a little bit because the travel time to Casimir is around 3 months. Obviously, things will happen on the way, and you'll be doing things on the way. But that is kind of the scope of time that we're looking at here. So as you're all thinking about where your characters sit with the world and themselves and how they see it, this is a good book to just ponder change.
So instead of multiple game sessions in one day, it could be multiple days in one game session.
Exactly. That's my hope.
And we will all lose our minds.
So being seated with Jamandor
Yeah.
and that experience as a daily reminder for the characters is intense. So while we're changing the way that we're playing and going through time, we got to remember that
Yes.
we're being hit over the head with Jamandor's.
And I will, of course, try to do my best to keep touch points on that, but also anything you can do on your end to be processing for yourself. What is this doing to me over time, and bringing that up at the points that feel right for you and where we're kind of all at.
And how will it be different? Because so from the time we got seated to now was how many days?
Days. Gosh.
Less than a
5,
week. Less than a
6.
week, right?
Less than a week. Less than a week.
So, and maybe this is you'll tell me, well, you'll just have to wait and see, Robert.
Expect to say that.
But what's the incubation time?
Exactly.
We have no clue. Characters
know.
have no clue,
You don't
right?
know.
In fact, players, I don't think we have a clue, do we? Is what
No.
the timetable is. So, the fact that we're looking at 3 months now,
Things could change.
that could be an interesting kettle
Yep.
of fish.
Exactly.
I wanted to go back to the shame action points thing really quickly.
Yeah.
I was thinking about what you were saying in terms of this being like a transition point, and I was thinking even with all of the madnesses and the stuff that we keep finding out about ourselves, that I also think of this as opening up into a place of free will that we haven't had as much, because we're entering a place where people don't know us.
Yes.
I'm sure we will run into some people that know us,
But you might
but
have
it's
a
not going to
window
be
here. Yeah.
it's not going to be the same thing where literally we walk in and we have so many preconceived notions that we're having to either fight against or embrace to
Yeah.
get things done.
Yeah.
Which is really kind of exciting to be for these characters also to be oh, I don't have to be that thing. I can let go of that thing.
Yeah,
And I don't
I
have
can
to fight against
choose
it. Yeah.
what to be.
I actually
kind of for the
have
first
I have
time.
some breathing space
Yes.
to choose.
Yeah, that's a great way
So
to
I
think
was
about it.
thinking of them as free will points or choice points. I don't know,
Sure.
something rather than it
Freedom
being
points.
freedom points. No, that sounds too stupid.
We'll find the right word.
I love you.
I
We'll go
love, I
back to
love
the classic
absolutely-
French points.
I like that thought though. I like that thought. We didn't do this before Act 2, and I don't even know if it's doable. But Katie and I, in a campaign that we're playing in, did kind of a version of this. I think you have to be far enough along in a story to be able to do this, but I want to loft up. What do you think's going to happen in book 3? Do you have any ideas that you want to throw out for brainstorm? And I will turn away so you don't see anything on my face. I'm just curious. Like, what do you imagine is going to happen?
Oh, boy. I'm terrified that we're going to find the mad poet and have to sacrifice somebody. That's my biggest fear.
Oh, I'm thinking about this idea of like either the presents that we have to get or the sacrifices that will have to be made.
Right.
I'm not convinced we will ever go to Casimir.
I love that.
Right.
Yeah.
I've said it so many times that you're now like, it's not happening.
No, not this book,
Yeah.
not in any book.
Casimir, Schmazimir.
Never gonna happen.
Yeah, I just have this vision of being pursued from behind while pursuing lulls ahead of us, and
By what do you think will pursue us?
I don't know. I don't know.
Certainly not
But-
a god of senseless warfare.
But whoever came to get Werelai's belongings, or
Her first mate.
the crew, right? Yeah. Did they?
There was a ship
There was a ship.
in the epilogue.
With another denizen of Lang
Yep.
Oh, right.
standing next to an undead.
Yep. And the ship was alive.
It was terrifying. But we don't know that yet.
No, your characters don't know that yet.
No.
I think that we're going to find out that almost everyone that we left behind in Thrushmoor is murdered and killed, and like bad things happen to them. And I don't want to think that, because I want to think that we set them up to somehow survive. And I'm have this horrific feeling that that's not going to be the case, because this is a horror campaign.
Makes note to self.
Oh,
Yeah, I think Jamandor is going to whisper that to you in the next couple of months.
I do think
Uh-huh.
I will finally get to use point blank shot
No,
sometime. I think it might
I'm
happen.
going to keep every enemy 35 feet away from you.
You're like,
the entire
Jamandor
book.
ate that part of you.
I think we're going to learn that the real Jamandor was the friends
Yes.
we made along the way.
It was. And with that,
Jamandor would say the same thing to you.
and with that, we'll see you all in book 3. Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Dark Nexus is a creation of Plug and Hum Productions. This podcast uses trademarks and/or copyrights owned by Paizo Incorporated, which are used under Paizo's community use policy. We are expressly prohibited from charging you to use or access this content. This podcast is not published, endorsed, or specifically approved by Paizo Inc. For more information about Paizo's community use policy, please visit paizo.com/communityuse. And for more information about Paizo and Paizo products, please visit paizo.com. That's PAIZO.com. Dark Nexus uses music and soundscapes by Sirenscape. Check them out at sirenscape.com. That's SYRINSCAPE.com. Opening and closing themes, along with additional music, composed by Rob Kauzlaric. Artwork for Dark Nexus is by Matt Wahlquist. Special thanks to Toy, without whose generosity this project would not have been possible. And thanks to DMCP, Richard and Ari, Paul and Shannon, Chris, Scotty, Jason, Jess, Joe, Chelsea, Matt, Dave, Darren, and everyone we've gamed with over the years for all the memories and inspiration.